I want to overview Proxmox VE. So a lot of interest for new hypervisors today. And this was a very highly anticipated capability, the sixth hypervisor from Veeam, but this one's a little bit different. And, those of you who have played with the Proxmox hypervisor, it's actually really familiar. If you've used another virtualization platform, it's quite familiar. I'll give it a gold star for ease of use, even though it's Linux based, right? I don't really get into the business anymore nowadays of recommending hypervisors, but I definitely want to be familiar with all of them. And so I know Kirsten's played with the Proxmox hypervisor. I've played with it as well. Very familiar interface to establish virtualization admins. So a couple of points I want to highlight. This one is actually unique in that in its first release, it brought in two different transport modes. Okay, so we're going to call it network mode and hot add, and that should also sound really familiar, but there's some design that goes with that. So the hot add mode will work when the individual virtual machine or machines that you're backing up are on the same host as the worker. And you might say, what's a worker? Well, I'll get back to that here in a second. And then also when it comes to the Proxmox VE backups, flexible recovery comes into mind. There's a number of different recovery options, not the full gamut. This is our first release in this space. It's reasonable to expect that there will be more different capabilities added, both in how we back up, how we do copies, how we do recoveries, all those different things, right? So we'll see how it goes. And as we showed in the main part of this event, Kirsten showed how the Veeam 1 event monitoring of these backups as well, right? So we're kind of starting quite strong for that sixth hypervisor here. One thing I'll highlight about Proxmox is that, like I said, it's quite easy to use. And when organizations are looking at it, I think it's worth having your own kind of lab, a pilot experience to kind of see how it works for you. So it's pretty easy to use, but I know a lot of people are curious about it. More so, how does it work with Veeam? So what I'm going to do is jump in and do a quick demo of the Proxmox worker. Now, I know I showed you one existing in the main part of the stream, but let me show you quickly how you would add a Proxmox worker. Okay, so now what we're looking at is our lab here. This is the same lab I was using for the general session. Now, a worker is loosely equivalent to a proxy. So if I'm going to take a look, first of all, at my individual Proxmox host here, now this is a single one. I have some, I have them powered off. I'll admit this is a lab. That's why it says unspecified. So it doesn't know because it hasn't been running. But I have 7 or so virtual machines on there and some Windows and some Linux. So this is what I'm starting with. Now, one of the things that come with the base release here with Proxmox is actually quite nice. If you want to do a test, you can right click and do a Veeam zip, right? This is existing Veeam zip capability. Just a quick backup. You can do that. Well, not quick backup. That's a different Veeam specific term, but a rapid ad hoc backup, right? So you can do a Veeam zip type of backup. So just like that, I'm doing a backup. And when you do that, you'll see this message here, preparing the worker 1. Now I already have one made, but let me show you what that is and how I got there. So if I go into the backup infrastructure, backup proxies, that's where the Veeam backups are done. And you'll see that, nowadays we have quite a few. I have a CDP proxy, I have a VMware proxy, I have agent proxies, and I have a Proxmox VE worker. Now, it is a slightly different name because it actually interacts a little bit more directly as such on the host. And that's why it's got this slightly different name, worker. And if you look at what we do in the cloud with the AWS backup products, the name doesn't matter too much, but just understand it is that data mover compute node that works directly on behalf of the console, the Veeam backup and replication server, to do the work. So I mentioned that I already have one, but what you would do is you would add a proxy here and just select Proxmox VE worker. And when you do that, you would identify the host. So I only have that one. So again, if I had a cluster of, I could put several, and then you can get into some of the designs of, if you have a worker on every host of a cluster, you could have the the hot add, the disk mapping go concurrently. And let's just call it VPS RV worker 2. And then you would select the individual storage. Now I have, again, kind of a small example here, but I have one set of local storage. If you had clustered storage or multiple volumes, you could get granular on that. And then this is interesting here, max concurrent tasks. Okay, I am going to set this to 2, just, to shape it, but you could go all kinds of numbers because I already have one, first of all. And then you could even get into the more granular resource provisioning of this system with, I'm going to go 4x4x2. You could go 2x2x2 just for consistency. I think probably if, as we go, you're going to see developing best practices. If you're just playing around with this, the defaults are going to be fine. 4x4x4, 4 tasks, 4 CPU, 4 gig. I am aware that I'm doing some lab magic. Okay. So I'm a little bit of a Veeam magician, so bear with me, but I've scaled it down to 2. You then can get into the networking. So in my environment, I do have DHCP. So that makes life a lot easier, but you could specify it if you wished. And then also if you had multiple networks, you could get into that. So you have if you've ever done, for example, a virtual lab, and I left that little box to test it really quickly, being brave here on my demo. If you've ever done a virtual lab in Veeam, this will be very, very familiar. So it's a really similar set of some of those questions, but it's not as advanced from the mapping and the masquerading. So it should be relatively straightforward. So this goes on and you'll have this worker made. Now I'm running a backup at the same time, which is also kind of a trick as well. But when you do this, then you basically are giving your Proxmox host the compute power in the form of a worker to do the work that your Veeam backup and replication server says to be done. So it's a very powerful way to, scale it, have some, shaping of the different traffic and stuff like that. Really good stuff. Now, the one thing I'll do here while I'm running this, I'm going to go take a look and you can see, let me jump out of one environment and log back in as you do. I think that's my password. And it's a lab, please ignore. And you'll see that my W2, my worker 2, is already deployed in the mix here. So you can see this stuff starting to be born as we are running here. That's what it looks like. That's what it should look like. So it's just now going to register and come back to it and those types of things. But I can tell you W2 is working as expected. So it's pretty interesting to see that when you add a worker, you can then go over to the host and see that deployed, which is kind of nice. And then know that when you run your jobs, it will then interact with the console to do those jobs. Now, I think also what's going to happen here is it's going to boot up, it's going to log in, it's going to double check that the comms are all working, but I know that it will. So I'll come back to that. I'm going to go back over to backup infrastructure. Worker 2 is there and it's still being deployed. So I'll just let that finish up. But I can tell you if I go back to the Proxmox host, you will see that worker 2 is still being powered up as we go. And you can see if you've not used Proxmox, here's a quick, easy look. Very intuitive to use, but that is how you deploy a worker in Proxmox. So good stuff.